Remember when you're making strudel is that you need to work in a warm room. And about 75 degrees is absolutely ideal. Okay, that's just about it. So I think from now on what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use my hands. I'm going to roll up my sleeves. And then the whole point is to get all of this dough stretched so that it overhangs this table. And so you can start by reaching in under and then just pulling the dough towards you and then pulling it away from you and then just kind of tugging at the ends. Do you see what's happening? When you look at if you tug at the ends, then the dough really stretches very, very nicely. And then you can do short strokes, very short pulls, very short tugs, until the dough increases even more. You see how much thinner the dough has gotten, and then what you really want to do is examine carefully the thickness of the dough at different sections. You'll see here the edges are thick, which is what you want because that's what we're going to be tugging on. Here it's also a little bit thick, but here it's thin. So if you have sections like that, then get your hands under there and then just move your fingers over and over. It's a hand over hand, very gently. It's just a very gentle tug. I want you to take a look at the fact that you can actually read right through the dough. So that shows you that this dough is absolutely perfect and thin enough to make into strudel. And what you're going to want to do, and I'm going to do this before I actually brush the dough with butter, is to cut away these thick edges going all the way around. And then once that's done, then I'll brush the dough with butter. The dough is very thin. And if you brush this dough in a traditional way, meaning, with strokes, you run the risk of tearing it. So I think the best thing to do is to take your brush and then just dip it in the butter and then just shake it. And once the butter has been drizzled evenly over the dough, then take your ground nuts and scatter them over. And then you have mixed up your strudel filling. Right after you finished brushing the dough brushing the butter on the dough, make sure that you just go and mix all of your apples and sugar, cinnamon mixture, and raisins, mix them all together. And then we're just getting them all kind of arranged in a very haphazard log. And we want this log to be several inches wide, like that. And then at this point you raise your sheet and you flip that top layer of dough right over the apples. And if any of your apples have moved, just nudge them gently back into place. Now, strudel means whirlpool or eddy. And so typically what you do is this. You roll the dough over, rolling it, and then just let it run all the way to the end of the sheet. And there's your strudel, all formed very evenly, very neatly. You can bring the last bit of dough over and then use your bed sheet to flip that seam over. Just tuck everything together, and then you have these ends. When you press down on these ends, you'll see that this is just dough. And what you're going to want to do is just cut these away. I've tucked the ends under, and then I have a baking sheet here that I brushed with some of the melted butter. And now we're going to get this strudel onto the sheet, and you'll see that it's a little bit longer than the width of the pan. But you know what? You just lift this up, get it into the pan. It's not going to go anywhere. And just shape the strudel to fit. Basically, that's all you do. And then you take the rest of the butter, and this is quite generous, brush it all over the strudel, and then you'll want to get it into a 450-degree oven for 15 minutes, which really helps the browning. And then you decrease the heat to 400 and let it bake for about another 25 minutes until when you stick a knife into the strudel, you'll see that the apples are really tender. Traditional German pretzels from southern Germany are made with a very firm dough, and there's a special ingredient in it that's based on barley. This bag is diastatic barley malt powder, and over here next to it is a jar of barley malt syrup. You have your choice of putting either one into the dough. Now, when you make the dough, you let it rise until it is doubled in size, and then you just indicate that by pushing into the dough with 2 fingers, and you see when the depressions remain, then you know that the dough is ready. It's very straightforward to make the dough in the mixer, and then to remove the dough from the mixer, just take a dough scraper or bench scraper, and then just dislodge it, quick strokes. The bowl has not been greased. And then your next step, see, this dough is non-sticky. It's just wonderful. It's very easy to work with. And your next step is to divide the dough, portion it out into 3-ounce portions. And you'll need to have 12. Just cut the dough with your bench scraper, and then weigh them. This is 3 3/4 ounces, so it's a little bit heavy. Anyhow, just continue doing this until you have 12 pieces of dough, each weighing about 3 ounces. And then once you have your 3-ounce pieces of dough, just shape them into balls, just like this. And what this does is develop a little bit of surface tension on them. And then just set them down on your work surface, a couple of inches apart. And then when they're all shaped into little balls, cover them with a kitchen towel and let them rest for about 15 minutes. While the balls of dough are resting, have ready 2 18 by 12 inch baking sheets and line them with parchment paper because you're going to be putting your pretzels onto those. And just get those off to the side. Take one of your balls of dough from under the towel, and this works really best on a wooden counter. Roll this dough out. This has to be quite long, and what you want is for this pretzel dough to be about 1 inch in diameter in the middle. It's got to have a fat middle, and notice when I release the dough how it wants to come back, retract. You need to get this dough out until it's about 23 inches in length. And you see how tapered the ends are. And when you get it to this length, just keep your fingers on the dough for a few seconds. Don't push down on the dough or else it'll break, just like it did right there. And then pick the dough up, give it a quick twist in the air, and then bring the ends up of the pretzel and then adhere them to the arm. Now let me just turn this to you so that you can see what this looks like. It should look just like that. And here are the pretzels all shaped on the 2 baking pans. And you see they each look quite unique. What you're going to need to do after they're all shaped is to cover them with kitchen towels and then let the pretzels rest at room temperature for 20 to 30 minutes, just until they've begun to rise a little bit. They should look just slightly puffy, but you don't want them to rise too much or else they will lose their wonderful chewiness. And then put them into the freezer for 1 full hour. One traditional step in making these German pretzels is to dip them into a bath of lye, which I have right here. And lye is sodium hydroxide. It's a very basic solution. This is 1%, 3% solution only, which means there's 1 ounce of lye in 1 quart of water. It's very dilute, but it does the job. If you don't want to work with lye, then use 2 tablespoons of baking soda that you dissolve in water. But lye gives a certain characteristic to these pretzels, which I think is really important. One of which is a certain tang that you will not get with the baking soda, and another is a crispness on the outside that also you will not get with the baking soda. Both help, though, to get the pretzel to brown properly in the oven. So, when you work with lye, use rubber gloves. This is a frozen pretzel. Take it right off the baking sheet. Dip it into the lye. Take 2 of them. And then the lye should cover the pretzel completely. Let the pretzels soak in the lye for about 15 seconds or so. The same thing would be true if you were using baking soda. And then just lift the pretzel out of the lye. It's very slippery. And replace the pretzel back on your baking sheet. And work with just 2 at a time. See, freezing these pretzels really makes this step very, very easy. And then you have a choice now. You have a choice of what to do. You can sprinkle your pretzels with salt. And this is just coarse salt. And you can just don't overdo this because you don't want it to be too salty. Take a couple of more pretzels. Dip them in the lye for, again, another 15 seconds. And then while that's happening, let me just show you what I have here for toppings for the pretzels. I have, starting from over here, poppy seeds and sesame seeds. These are brown sesame seeds. And I also have some pumpkin seed over here. You can also do sunflower seed, anything that you like. And also notice that in this lye bath, in this whole area, I have lined my counter with paper because lye will stain wood. So just be aware of that when you're doing this at home. So drain off the excess liquid. And I'm going to put this into the poppy seed and press it down. And then I'll take this one and I'll press it into the sesame seed. And see, this lye bath will help the toppings stick. See how lavish that is? And just set it right back down onto your baking sheet. And then if you want to make sure that it's all covered, just sprinkle some more onto your pretzel. Once they're all dipped, once all your 12 pretzels are dipped and coated with seed, then let them sit at room temperature for about 15 to 20 minutes until they're partially thawed. And then we'll be ready to move on to the next step. Now, these pretzels traditionally have a slash around their real fat middles, and then these slashes expand during baking. So once the pretzels have sat at room temperature, the frozen ones that you've coated with the seeds, once they've sat at room temperature for 15 to 20 minutes, take a razor blade and then along the arc, along this back edge here, make a slash, forming a C, a large C. And you don't have to do this quickly. Just make it as even as you can. And make sure that you go in about 1/4 of an inch. Okay, and this will expand during baking. Now, once all of your pretzels have been slashed like this, leave the pretzels at room temperature for about an hour until they're completely thawed and they start to become slightly puffy again. And then bake them following the directions in your recipe. And once they're done, you peel them off the parchment, set them on a cooling rack, and when they're completely cool, you can just dig in and eat them. They are just absolutely scrumptious fresh. We're going to be making Swedish saffron bread, a specialty of St. Lucia's Day, which is December 13th. And there are a couple of special spices in this bread I'd like to show you. One of them comes in these pods. This happens to be green cardamom. There are other types of cardamom. And when you crack into cardamom and you take out what's inside, you find these little teeny little black seeds. And what you need to do is grind these up for this incredibly wonderful spicy aroma, and it's just an absolutely unique taste. And the Swedes have done wonders with cardamom. And then next to it is a big pinch, about a half teaspoon of saffron threads, and that's of course where this bread gets its name. And make sure that you use genuine saffron. We'll put that into a mortar and a pestle, about a half teaspoon of saffron, and then add a teaspoon or so of sugar. And then you want to grind it all together. And this is just going to make the saffron easier to dissolve. Just until you get fine little particles. And then I have some heated up butter and milk, a half stick of butter and 1 cup of whole milk, unsalted butter, and then you just add your saffron and sugar to this milk, and then stir it and let it set it aside, because you'll see it's got this beautiful golden color now. Now we also have the cardamom, and the freshest cardamom is what you grind yourself. So I'm just putting it in the mortar and then just pulverize it. Go around and around and around and around until it's very fine. And this probably will take you a couple of minutes. It should be very fine. You shouldn't have any little gritty particles. And then just transfer your cardamom to this little cup. Okay, now we're ready to make the dough. And for the dough, we're going to start off with 2 cups of all-purpose flour measured by the dip and sweep method. The remaining half cup of sugar, a package of, this is instant yeast, and then we'll need a half teaspoon of salt. And then we'll add our cardamom. And I'm just going to stir all of this together just to get everything mixed up. Now here is this hot mixture, and it shouldn't be any hotter than about 130 degrees. Pour it right in to the flour. We're going to use about 3 cups of flour total, and we'll start with 2 cups because you want to get a batter. Isn't this color startling? It's just so brilliantly yellow gold, and you'll want to beat this probably for 3 to 4 minutes to really get a nice thick batter going in to help develop the gluten. And then stir in about, I'd say about half cup of the remaining flour. Sprinkle about a quarter cup of my flour left. And then I'll scrape the dough. Onto the flour. You see, you don't really need an electric mixer to make this. You can do this quite easily by hand. And if you let the dough, at this point, if you let it sit, for a couple of minutes, it'll start to absorb the flour, and it'll make the kneading a little bit easier. You see how this dough is coming together really nicely, and it's developing some nice stretchiness. And then also there's one other step, and that is to add a quarter cup of currants. And then you just knead the currants into the dough. Just knead it in. You can do it this way. I have here some risen dough. And this has been rising at about a 70-degree room temperature for, say, 2 hours or so. And you see that it's more than doubled in bulk. And what you want to do is lightly oil or coat with cooking spray a 3-quart bowl, put your dough in, cover it with plastic wrap, and set it aside to rise. And then when it's all risen, turn your dough out. And since we're going to do a braid, what I want to do is divide the dough into thirds. So I'm going to eyeball what a third is. So we have 3 pieces of dough. And then what we're going to want to do is shape each into a log just about 18 inches long. So we have our 3 long logs of dough, and I'm going to braid it, and I'm going to start it from the middle. So I'll take one strand and lay it over the middle one, and then I'll take the outer strand and lay it over the other outer strand. And then just do this as a loose braid. Do it down to one end, and it's fairly loose. And then when you get to the ends, just kind of tuck them under, like that. And then I'm just going to set it on a baking sheet with some parchment. And then I'll cover it with plastic wrap and let it rise until it's almost double in bulk. You can do this at room temperature or in a warm place. Brush it with an egg glaze. And then bake it at 375 degrees for about 35 minutes or so until the braid is all done and it looks like this. We're making kroomkake, a Norwegian wafer cookie that you wrap around a wooden mold. And these cookies go way back in history. And I'm going to begin by beating 3 eggs for several minutes until they become very thick and pale. Now I'm going to gradually beat in 3/4 of a cup of sugar on a medium speed. So I'm going to increase the speed now to high and then beat again for about 3 or 4 more minutes. Okay, we're just about done. I'm going to turn the mixer off. And you can see this lovely thick batter. And then we're going to, on low speed, beat in 1 cup of flour that we have measured by spooning the flour into the cup and leveling it off, 1/2 teaspoon of salt and 2 teaspoons of vanilla. And then just beat this in on low, just to incorporate. This will be a pretty thick batter. There, that's fine. And then for our last step in making the batter, I'm going to take 2/3 of a cup of melted butter, unsalted butter, add a little bit of it to the batter, and then fold it in gently. And make sure that the butter is tepid, not hot, because if it is hot, then the batter will be deflated. Okay, the butter is all folded in, and you can see this really is a very thick, creamy batter, and you should set it aside for about 30 minutes or so. It can even sit a little bit longer. And here's a batter that I made a little bit earlier. And as you can see, it's quite thick. It's way too thick to use for kroomkake. So what you need to do is add little bits of warm water. Just very gradually folding the warm water into the dough. Now you don't want the batter too thin, because if it's too thin, then the kroomkake will be too delicate. And if they're too thick, then they'll just be too heavy. So this is kind of like getting the porridge for Goldilocks just right. This batter over time will get thicker. So keep some warm water handy and then just stir it into the batter as you need it. You can always cut away the excess with a knife. And make sure that you put your krumkake iron onto a baking sheet with paper towels underneath it, because this gets very, very, very hot. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Here's one more. And just take this and roll it around. And then just let it settle like that. And the beautiful thing about these, they're very delicate. They're wonderful nibbles. They keep for a couple of weeks at room temperature in airtight containers between layers of paper. And to serve these, you would fill them with flavored whipped cream, rum flavor or just sugar flavor. And also you could fold in some blueberries or raspberries, but don't do that until you're just ready to serve. This is a Norwegian kransekake, 18 rings of almond paste, and I'm going to show you how to make one today. Kransekake begins with almonds, and there are a couple of ways of grinding almonds. What I have here is an old-fashioned nut grinder, the kind that clamps to the table. It's kind of like a large muhly grater, and I love this for grinding nuts because I get an absolutely wonderful powdery texture which keeps the nuts very, very light and airy. But I want you to take a look at these nuts, especially as they come out of the grinder, and you see how powdery they are and how light and fluffy. And this is exactly what you want. For this kransekake, I have 1.5 pounds of unblanched whole almonds that I just ground up. Do you see how lovely and powdery that is? And then I'm adding 1.5 pounds of powdered sugar. And I'm going to toss all of this together just with my hands to make this mix together very, very thoroughly. So we'll have 3 pounds of mixture total. And then into this, I'm going to add 3/4 teaspoon of baking powder. And the baking powder just helps to give the kransekake a little bit of lightness, because this is almond paste, which tends to be fairly heavy in texture, and the baking powder does just a great job of lightening it up just a little bit. Toss this around very, very well. Now I'll need to make the paste in the food processor, but I can make the paste in the food processor after grinding the nuts with the nut grinder. And for doing that, I need to measure 3 cups or 12 ounces. I'm going to weigh 12 ounces. I'll measure 3 cups and see how close I come. Just dip and sweep like that. It's 11 3/4 ounces, so I'm just going to add enough for 12. And then I will put this into the food processor. This is 1/4 of the mixture, so you need to do this step 4 times. So put this into the work bowl of the